Hey folks, welcome back to the Mac and Mike show. You probably know by now which one is Mac and which one is Mike. I don't, he gives me hell all the time, so you don't have to say which is which. So we didn't do a lot of pre-planning for this. And we're out on the porch, and actually most of the day we talked about various religious topics, which we try not to keep into this particular podcast. We tend to do the Mac and Mike Sundays with Mac and Mike to do something religious, but I mentioned to Mike that a friend of mine recently reached out to me and asked me if I would participate in a study that a friend of his was doing. I guess his friends was particularly looking for someone who was a Trump voter to ask this question of, and what they're trying to discern, what they're trying to discuss and research is the question that I guess more liberals are talking about than conservatives, and that is individual view on democracy and whether or not it's working or not. If it's not working, what needs to be fixed? And I guess they had a lot of survey participants who were on the left leaning side of the political spectrum, but they didn't have enough of the right leaning members to add to their research. So, because this was a friend of mine, I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that. I'll do it for you, and I owe you, and if this will help your buddy out, I'll do it." So, what I thought Mike and I would talk a little bit about beforehand in this podcast is what is democracy? Is democracy in America working? And if it's not working, what needs to be fixed? I mean, there's a whole lot of political debate going on. Oftentimes, it's very passionate. Sometimes it even crosses the line from being passionate to being deadly. We could look at Charlie Kirk being shot. We could look at multiple attempts on the president's life. Um, I don't know, Mike. Do you want to jump in and start with something? Is there a particular part of democracy in America that is or is not working?
Well, like I said on the back porch, democracy is not really what we are. We are a representative Republican or a representative republic. And, that's often overstated. Some people say, oh, we already knew that. Well, there is a difference. I guess the Greeks tried democracy, which is, everybody gets a vote. And then there's republic, where the Romans did, where you represent a group of people and you vote for the representatives, which
Sure.
is what we have at the almost all levels of government. Even local, you vote for a town mayor, town council.
Roman Senate was infamous, right?
Yeah, yeah, and there's no perfect government. Um, so I said the worst is democracy, pure democracy, because the have-nots always vote to take from the haves to give them to ourselves. Because getting back to religion, we are sinful, selfish creatures. Whether you believe in a religion or not, we pretty much understand we're all pretty much selfish in some sense. We will have a tendency, not all of us, but the majority of us have a tendency to vote to make our own lives better. And in order to do that, as Thomas Sowell pointed out, is you have to take from somebody else to do that. Yeah, everything is a trade-off. There's you trade somebody else's money in the form of taxes to increase your lifestyle of living that you want, whether it's healthcare or any of these things. But the thing I guess you're driving at, and this man's driving at more than get that fly off of me, um, is really the division politically. It doesn't really have so much to do with democracy or representative republic per se. It has to do with the division of ideas. And, it's been heightened now under President Trump, yet it always existed if you stop and look back, all the way back to colonial days. I think you brought that up several times. Some really nasty stuff being said about each other and nasty letters. So we have this in written form. It's not just something historians are pulling out of their butts. So, and it used to be understood that good people differ, right? Like you're a Christian of one flavor, I'm one of another. I'd say we're both good people, but we differ. The same is true about used to be true about politics. I used to accept and still do for the most part that people who are Democrats or somewhat liberal are well-meaning good people overall and by and large. You know, you get on social media, you watch Fox News or MSNBC or MS Now, and they show you the extremes, and those extremes exist. But I think if you get out in the street, like my neighbor and I were just talking the other day, she hates Trump, you know, and I vote for him. We're in the Vets for Trump website. Yet she knows she can trust me to watch her house. And I would trust her and her husband to do the same. So if we're looking for a solution, there is no good solution until people get off of the internet, stop taking what the extremists on both sides say so seriously, and get out and meet people. Because it used to be that, and I know I'm going on, I'm sorry, Mac. It used to be that we all identified the same problems and just had different ways of solving those problems. Today, it seems to me that we can't even agree on what the problems are. So if you can't agree on what the problems are, you can't come together in a mutual sense to work towards any type of compromise. Your thoughts on that? What do you think?
Well, democracy is really in its basic raw form is nothing more than mob rule. The people who shout the loudest and push the hardest usually get their way.
Mhm.
And you pointed out that we're a representative republic, not a true democracy. But you said something in when our conversation earlier. You said representative republic is just a slower form of failure, and I thought
Yes.
that was an interesting way of describing it
Mhm.
because I have higher hopes for our republic than that. Um, I'm sure that what this guy wants to talk about are some of the divisions that we have today with response to politics. But in my estimation, in my mind, there is, and you and I have talked about this before, there is right or wrong. There just is.
Mhm.
It's right or wrong. And there is a truth. Some people say, well, this is my truth. No, 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 I'm sorry. There is absolute abstract truth. And the drive should be, the attempt should be to arrive at the truth, whatever that is. We had an excerpt of a political debate the other day about what's going on in the mayor's race in California, and the one guy said it's wrong to support these drug addicts and people that are abusing the system by giving them access to more of the drugs that they want. And the way to handle that is to use more policing and maybe get people off of drugs. They don't want you know they, and the alternate view was, well, let's continue to support these people and make it available to them to have the drugs. And the I don't know that you can't that the absolute truth is the human condition is such you're better off if you're not a drug addict. I
Yeah,
mean, that's just the
it's
truth.
obvious,
Yeah.
right?
And so to these people that argue, let's support these people and give them more drugs, how can that possibly be a correct answer? Now, in a democracy, I understand, what is it we say in the Declaration of Independence? We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights. So if somebody wants to choose to be a drug addict, does the government have the right to say you can't be a drug addict? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At some point in time, there's a line that shouldn't be crossed by the organization as opposed to the individual rights. But by the same token, those individual rights, and we've talked about this before, the old concept in Old English law, you have an absolute right to swing your fist up until the point where it hits my nose.
Mhm.
And, at what point in time do these drug addicts living in tents in the public parks uh, deprive the people, the non-drug addicts, the non-homeless people, from simply walking down the sidewalks or enjoying their parks? There has to be some sort of process or compromise or set of rules that allows both of those things to be true, but not take from one to give to the other, like you said before with the taxes, you know. And so the point is that when you're in that environment, there has to be a way that all the participants needs can be fulfilled, but by the same token, not infringe, not hit somebody else in the nose. And I don't know what the answer is, you know. And I'm going to participate in the in the research project because it's a good friend of mine, and he asked me to do it as a favor to him. And I will give my, I guess, you know, as we heard in the debate, that's a MAGA opinion. I don't consider myself to be MAGA. You know, I mean, did I vote for Donald Trump? You know, going back to 2016, I didn't support Donald Trump as my candidate of choice. I just simply didn't. When they went it down and the primary election was held, and you had a choice between Donald Trump and you know, his opponent, I ended up, you know, supporting the candidate Donald Trump that I thought more closely aligned my views. You look at 2020 and then 2024, and you know, I found it very difficult to be a supporter of Joe Biden, who I thought was already exhibiting, you know, some sort of mental fatigue, if not outright dementia or some other kind of thing. And now, you know, Donald Trump speaks of himself in third person.
Yes,
I hate that.
me too.
Donald Trump is bombastic. It's not that we have a good economy. It's the best economy the world has ever seen under my terms and my presidency and that's not true either. I mean, so do I support Donald Trump? Yes. And why do I support Donald Trump? Because I think that his policies that he has enacted are better for me, and more importantly, because I'm old, more important for my children
Children and
and
grandchildren.
children's children and children's children. And because, you know, this grand experiments in self-governance, that, you know, representative republic that you kind of dismissed offhandedly, it's going to fail too, just fail slower.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I don't. Okay, go ahead.
but my point is that, you know, the only perfect form of government, I suppose, for efficiency and for care of the people would be a benevolent monarch. The
Addict.
problem with the human condition is that very few benevolent monarchs exist. And if they do exist, seldom do they remain benevolent their entire reign, you know? So this representative republic experiment in self-governance, I think, it may not be the perfect form, but it's the best form that human beings have agreed to allow themselves to be governed by. True? Not true?
Well, it may be the best besides the benevolent dictatorship that we mentioned, because the next guy that's the dictator may not be as benevolent as the last, even if he's able to carry it through that reign. But we have seen this in our life. I mean, you're 70, I'm 68. We have seen where the rep, again, the reason I say it won't last is we know that the pure democracy is, like you said, mob rule. People will vote to take from those that have and give to themselves. In a representative republic, it just takes longer. And like I said, we've seen the polarization increase over our lives, where those people that now represent us are acting more like the mob mentality. They can't agree on what the problem is. If they could agree on what a problem is, they cannot agree on a solution that works for everyone, that is some kind of compromise. And there comes a point, like in the Civil War, it was over taxation and slavery,
States' rights.
states' rights. Well, state rights, yeah, because they gave different levels of taxation to agricultural areas versus industrial. All that aside, we're seeing that same kind of crescendo coming. We just can't agree on what a woman is, what a man is.
See, that's the
I
problem.
mean, that's the most, stark example, I
That,
suppose.
that that that's the problem. How do you agree what the problems are when we can't agree what a woman is? I mean, I remember the questions that were brought to the next Supreme Court justice was going to be appointed, and several people asked this candidate to be the next Supreme Court justice, "What is a woman?" And the candidate was unable to answer, maybe not unable to answer, but unwilling to answer because of the politics of the day. And I guess what I'm saying, Mike, is that how can there be debate if there's not agreement as to what the truth is? And we know the truth. We may ignore it. We may want to mealy mouth it or pretend it doesn't exist. But whether we accept it or not, or recognize it or admit it, the truth always exists. The truth exists in its basic form and is seldom, if ever, changed.
There are other things too to consider. There's some things that you cannot know the truth because we're trying to predict the future. For example, the war in Iran. So, see, on one hand, you have a group of people that say Iran was eventually going to get a nuclear bomb and they're a threat and they're going to destroy the world. There's the other group that says, okay, they're not the best, but they're not likely to do anything, so we shouldn't, go to war with them. So depending on which point of view you come at is going to determine, but you're not talking about things that you can prove because they haven't happened yet. There are other issues like tariffs. Some people like tariffs, some people don't. It used to be the Democrats love tariffs, now they don't because Trump likes them. And then there's the extremes that say, well, tariffs will take the place of income taxes. No, they won't. They never will. They could have in the 1800s, but not today because our total budget that we create is much higher than the entire ability to generate income in the United States. So yeah, that won't work either. And people just can't even accept the truth about that. I mean, I'm talking to. I have a friend that's a TDS guy, but there's some things I'll agree with him on. There are some people on the right that are so crazed, they'll insist I'm wrong that we could actually replace the income tax with tariffs. They can't do simple math and they won't just take the time to look at numbers. It's impossible. I mean, unless you want to pay 261% more for everything, then you could do it.
Did the sun come up this morning, Mike?
Yep,
Will it come up tomorrow morning
likely,
and the day after that?
probably,
Okay. And you think that it will because
because of past history. Yeah.
it's come up every so when you when you say the Iranians aren't going to use a nuclear weapon,
I didn't say I didn't say that. That's the other side.
But yeah, but see, therein lies the conundrum, right? Therein lies the problem. If they've shown time after time after time after time after time after time after time that they will do things that we would rather not allow other people to do to us or anyone else, including our allies, based on their past history of doing those things, you think to yourself, just like the sun's going to come up tomorrow. Why? Because it came up yesterday and the day before. So I believe it's coming up tomorrow. So if they've done these kinds of attacks time and time and time again, terrorist attacks using their own people or proxies, yeah, you probably believe they're going to do it in the future as well. And the thing about a nuclear attack is that that's a pretty permanent kind of thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's something you can risk.
if you blow up a train and you kill 500 people, that's a terrible thing. But you use a nuclear weapon and you kill millions of people, and oh, by the way, because of the half-life of the nuclear contamination, what you're really talking about is not being able to use that geographic location for many, many years afterwards. Maybe that's a different problem entirely, and we ought to treat it differently. And therein lies the real problem between, as my friend said, the liberal and the conservative view. I can tell you what a woman is, and apparently many liberals are not incapable of defining it as clearly as I'm able to define it.
Well, they can. They're just, I think, what you said. They're unwilling to. Yeah.
So where do we find the common ground? Is that democracy? And maybe the question shouldn't, as you said before, maybe the question isn't, is democracy safe or is it working or what do we need to do to fix our democracy? Maybe what we need to do is to just look at what the truth is and not call it a democracy, not call it a representative republic. Let's just deal with truth. And maybe that's the way I should come at it when I'm doing the interview for their research. What's true and what isn't? Can we at least agree to what the truth is so that we have a foundation from which to ask all these other
Yeah.
questions?
What is the solution? If we accept this as like okay, example, we have homeless people in the street. Many of them are addicted to drugs. A lot of them have mental illness. Many of them have a combination of the two. By closing the mental institutions and things of that nature because they had become abusive in
Mhm.
some cases, letting the people live on the street and doing what they want and hurting others is not the solution. I mean,
As a matter of fact, it doubled the problem.
yeah. So what is the compromise? I mean, there could be. Should we reinstitute mental institutions? And then come the legal questions about who can you voluntary versus involuntary commitment, who has the say. Are there enough judges? Would it overcrowd the courts? That's why we have no fault divorce. It overcrowded the courts. Are there too many cases to be heard by judges? I don't know that there's any easy answers, but simply saying we should give these people money and let them live on the streets, not the solution.
Well, here's the other part of it, Mike. There are countries, as a matter of fact, our neighbors to the north, they have a policy of, I'll call it assisted suicide. There's a lot of
Mhm.
different ways to talk about that particular option, that particular solution to a problem. Maybe what we do with the homeless or the drug addicts or the mental patients is we give them a choice of, and I'm not saying I'm advocating for this, but maybe the question should be, do you want to get taken care of? Do you want to get your life straightened out? Or do you want the ultimate option to be, your option,
Yeah.
I read a story, it was heartbreaking for me. There was a relatively healthy woman who was an actress of some note who petitioned for assisted suicide, and her reason for doing so was
Depression.
not because she was some sort of medical disorder, but because she didn't think her life was worth anything.
Mhm.
And that I think you use the word depression. I think that gets to a mental health kind of position because, you know, at, who decides in this all men are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights? Who decides whether or not their life is worth something?
Mhm.
Do we have the right to impose our view of your life has value if they don't think they do? And this is somewhat esoteric argument, and maybe it doesn't have anything to do with democracy or represent a republic at all, but it does cross over into those religious tones that we talked about.
Mhm.
It seems to me that life is precious. I heard a joke one time, and the scientist was saying, talking about creating life, and he said, "What's so hard about that?" He said, "I can create life." And he says, "Well, what do you mean you can create life?" "Well, yeah, I just take I can take the tissue from a living being and I can clone it and make another life." And God's voice can be heard in the background. No, you got to start with your own nothing.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Anyways, I don't know the answer. I think I'm looking forward to the interview. I'm looking forward to the research. It's not something that I would have volunteered for. I'm not so egotistical to think that my opinion is superior or more valid or more worthy to be included in this kind of research than somebody else's opinion. But as I was asked to do so, and I will, as a favor to this person that asked me. But I'll be interested in seeing what kind of flavor he imparts to me, what rules, when you start doing research, you have to, there has to be a boundary. There has to be, well, we're not going to go past this mark, or we're not going to go past this mark. But in this field between those two boundaries, let's talk about this issue. So to me, it'll be interesting to see where the boundaries are put for me.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to use religion? Am I allowed to use, let's say, conservative political thought? You know, the funny thing to me, Mike, is that things that were once considered liberal are now considered conservative. And many of the liberals have changed the name from liberal to progressive, meaning that they want to take what once was and kind of make it better because we live in new times and we have new technology, whatever application, uh, whatever reason you give for being progressive instead of liberal. And Thomas Jefferson himself called himself a liberal, and he was the one that wrote
Yeah.
yeah. So how did we get, and what do words actually mean if we can change them? Our country is relatively young, 250 years. We can change the meaning of the word liberal from Thomas Jefferson's time to today. Seems a little bit.
It seems odd to us, but words do evolve in their meaning over time and they expand too and become nuanced. A word that may have meant one solid thing may have five possible definitions in the dictionary today. So, yeah, but words are trying to express thoughts, and that can be difficult from time to time. So, anyway, the parameters you were talking about there are going to be interesting. But one other thing is solution. Talking about solution orientation, me being in the military, when I went to my boss or my subordinates came to me, I said, "Don't come to me with the problem. We already know what it is. If you have a problem, you better come with a couple answers. Give me some options to choose from. So if there's no solution, don't come to me with the problem." At the same time, I look at, okay, what are the solutions in this case? Well, we have representatives, and we see they're acting more and more like the common man, using, they're talking like a couple drunks at a bar, both sides, but more on the left, I'll grant you. I said, why don't we make, before you can run for office, you have to pass a test like we did in the military. We had to go through an ASVAB test. And if you didn't meet a high enough criteria, you get the opportunity to hold one of the more important jobs. You could make a guy that swept floors or was a cook or peeled potatoes or whatever, or a security cop. Did I say that out loud? But you couldn't get into my career field unless you had a higher aptitude. So anyway, that's maybe we need that for politicians. I said a second thing is maybe we ought to have a minimum credit score for our politicians before they can run for office. If you can't show that you can handle your own money, how are you going to handle the people's money? You know, you got to show that you're capable. I don't know what the minimum credit score would be, 750, something like that or higher. But, we need to set standards before you should even be able to contend for the position. Maybe
Yeah,
pass a critical thinking.
I understand the logic behind your suggestions, and I'm not suggesting that you're not correct or that you are wrong. But I think that this idea of all men are created equal, as we call out in our Declaration of Independence, would kind of obviate those hurdles to jump over in order to play. My mom, very wise woman, taught me when I was very young. I went to her at one point in time and complained that, I don't know, somebody could play baseball better than me, whatever the heck it was, that they could run faster than me. And my mom said something to me that was very insightful at the time. She said, "Yeah, yeah, they can run faster than you, but you have another talent that they don't have."
Mm,
And, that kind of gets into the religion bit of it a little bit, or the God part of it. But God makes each one of us individually, and we each have certain talents and abilities that others don't have. And that test you were talking about, the ASVAB test, what they really tried to do was, if your highest and best use was as a truck mechanic, then they tried to guide you into that career field.
Hmm.
If your highest and best use was, developing the next nuclear weapon, they kind of, directed you in that direction. So the point I'm trying to get with is that that test was not just whether or not you're smart enough to do the job. It was where do your talents. It was more where do your talents lie, so that we can help direct you in an area that you're going to be most successful. I think it's unfair to characterize the ASVAB as just being, are you smart enough to do this?
Well, no, but it gave you a score of, broad spectrum mathematics, geometry, critical thinking, etc. But I was shaking my head no, hoping you didn't think all men are created equal, because we're not, because the rest of it is inalienable rights endowed by their creator. That's the level of equality. We're certainly not all created equal. Um, and so
Or some are more equal than others. But again,
Animal Farm.
my mom's comment that they may be smarter than you in geometry, but you're better than them in English composition. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there are talents that each one of us have that are different. And the truth be known, Mike, the best combination of all of those talents mixed together. I could remember when I was a kid, we used to talk about America as being the great melting pot. And the first person I heard that didn't use the term the great melting pot was President Clinton, who said, we are a salad bowl. All the ingredients are in the same bowl, but we're all separate and distinct. And I think that's the part that gets lost when we're talking about democracy or representative republic. People of different ethnic backgrounds, different cultures, because I truly believe that rather than, you know, race, color, and creed, I think culture is the divider, you know? What what are you looking for and willing to accept? And how do I behave and act? And where does my behavior, my actions cross, or come in conflict with your cultural attitudes about the same actions and the same, I think that's really where the barrier needs to be broken down, and where we need to be more accommodating of one another's differences. Therein, I think, lies where, if you want to say, there's the part where democracy needs to be, quote, fixed, be more accommodating, more accepting of the cultural differences of this great melting pot.
Well, yeah, we run into very difficult times when it comes to accepting the like Islamic culture in some sense, the Sharia law stuff and things like that.
Well,
We
see,
we
that
can't we can't incorporate that into the Constitution. They don't believe
no,
it, the
no,
Constitution.
no. But see, here's the problem when you're talking about that particular religion, Mike, and that may be the only religion that I'm familiar with that has this. Their belief that Sharia law must be the supreme law of the land, that no law can be above Sharia. In our nation, because of its belief in no national religion, when we talk about freedom of religion, we're saying that everyone can choose the religion of their choice, but it doesn't supersede the laws of the Constitution that protect all religions. And what happens with Sharia is, because they believe it's superior to the Constitution, first, if they truly believe in that religion, in that Sharia law, they can't take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, which in my mind makes them ineligible for citizenship, which is one of the things you have to do, is swear the oath to the Constitution. But more so, if you put Sharia superior to the Constitution, what does that do to freedom of religion?
Right.
If Sharia is superior,
Yeah.
then what about the laws and regulations or cultural differences of all the other religions? Can they exist under Sharia?
Exactly
And
the
the,
point
and
I
the
was
answer
making.
is no.
Right. And you mentioned like an immigrant can't become a citizen if they truly believe that. But hey, what do you do if they're born here? So the bottom line is, even if you're born here, you adopt the Islamic religion, you still can't act in such a way that it violates the Constitution. You can hold your own personal belief, but you can't enact it. That's fine with me. You believe in Satan, Sharia, whatever. You don't bring it to the point where it affects somebody else.
Well, after I'm involved in this research and I learn a little bit more about it, and I'm told where the boundaries are and how we're going to define what democracy is and what its problems are and what the fixes are, maybe we'll come back and have this conversation a second time and
Yeah, look
we'll
like
find,
a time clock says we beat it up pretty good.
all right,
Time flew by.
I guess. Well, I guess what we'll say then is Mac and Mike
Out.
out.